From American Bulletin, July, August 2006, The Nature of a Remedy. Bigger text, plus smaller text. By Jim Rivers and Obi-Wan Kenobi. What is the purpose of this white paper? In its simplest form, it is to address the question that is asked by almost every so-called freeman and inmate who has ever been railroaded by a totally corrupted so-called judicial system. For the individual who knows they have actually committed crime against their fellow man, the outrage of being incarcerated is severely subdued by self-admission of guilt and expectation of punishment if caught. So it is the truly outraged individual railroaded by the system who will be the most motivated to make the concerted effort to understand the information presented here and to pursue its remedy. What is the system? Without a fundamental understanding of what the system actually is and some understanding of how it got this way, there is virtually no possibility of understanding and correctly implementing a remedy. The subject of what the system is, as opposed to what the system appears to be, could easily encompass a 1,000-page book. A history book explaining the events of the past that led up to present state of the system could easily fill up several thousand pages. And even if such books were in your possession, would you make the effort to digest the information? And even more important, how could you know it was the truth, or was it just a bunch of half-baked theories that fall apart upon the serious examination by objective analysis? Obviously, this extremely brief paper will make no attempt to prove anything stated within regarding the system will of necessity be simply asserted as fact, firmly established as irrefutable, yet facts that will probably contradict everything you thought you understood about the system. You will either face up to the fact that you have been deceived and lied to all your life about almost everything you think you know about the global financial prison that all the entire world is now part of, also referred to as the system. For those of you, the vast majority of humanity, who believe that such an evil global system of grand deception and enslavement cannot possibly exist, the mere suggestion of it sounding like the utterances of those conspiracy nuts and usually dismissed as kooks. I suggest you immediately cease reading any further, since I have no intention of communicating with the hopelessly brain-dead masses on these matters. It goes against my nature to be simply making assertions that are not backed up with rigorous proof, but I am of necessity going to have to just move forward and assert the facts as irrefutable truth. If you demand the truth in life without compromise, you will eventually come to the same truth about the system. And what do I mean by that system? The system consists of all the institutions that man has created to organize/control/sustain itself, in particular government, religion, and commerce. There are no sharp demarcations between these three institutional entities, and in fact are so hopelessly intertwined that I will refer to them as the system. See the first Matrix movie again and again and again. The foundational facts to understand. Fact number 1, the system in today's world, on a global widespread basis, is now completely dominated/controlled by the forces of darkness, i.e. Satan/Lucifer/devil. This is not some mystical superstitious ravings. The dark forces are absolutely for real, are extremely ingenious in the science of controlling the people's thinking, and control all governments of men, and control the vast overwhelming majority of all religions, and in particular, all of so-called Christendom, not true Christianity, represented by the harlot upon the beast in Revelation scripture. And for our analysis, the most important realization is that the financial/economic systems, in particular banking, the principal control lever point of the commerce game and the resulting enslavement of all of mankind. There is ample, if not massive, confirmation that one indeed seems to be now well approaching the final battle of righteousness over Satan's pure evil. Fact number 2, probably, as much as a little over 80% of the American people still believe that man's problems can be solved by political action, voting, having an informed opinion on political matters. They accept what they hear on the media and believe that authority can be trusted. Less than 10% of this group will ever realize how profoundly deceived they have been. Fact number 3, the world and all its resources, its most important being the human slave resources, are in fact controlled by extremely wealthy and powerful families whose ingenious extortion strategies has become the foundation of the world economy, global economy slavery, through the creation of fictional indebtedness by imposition of centralized banking to ultimately deprive the people of all property and freedom. Fact number 4. Secret societies such as Illuminati, Luciferians, Freemasonry, 33-inch level and above, and others are keepers of arcane knowledge that guarantees the keeping of ordinary people in political, economic, and spiritual bondage. Major breakthrough in the sciences such as physics, medicine, engineering, etc. have long been consistently suppressed by these groups for purposes of maintaining plunder and control of the unthinking masses. Fact number 5, the original de jure republican form of government given to us by our founding fathers, referred to as the United States of America, has been replaced by stealth and deception with a private, foreign-owned and operated for profit, actually plunder, de facto corporate democracy, not a republican, in actuality a municipal corporation of the District of Columbia, or the United States. United States being incorporated in England, our former enemy, in 1878. Fact number 6, the state of Ohio, or any state of underscore 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 refer not to the legitimate de jure republic, a party to the Constitution for the United States of America, but are unincorporated, no physical boundaries defined in their Constitution, municipal corporate instrumentality of the United States, fraudulently established under the Buck Act of 1940. These de facto government impersonators have no actual lawful authority over any inhabitants of the several states of the Union, being ultra-virus and null-teal to the corporate charter. They are the purest form of total fraud and deception against the people. Fact number 7, all the state courts found within the state of Ohio, or any state of underscore 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 underscore. Fact number 8, in order to overcome the total. Fact number 8, Fact number 7, all the state courts found within the state of Ohio, or any state of underscore 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 being brought into existence under the fraudulent authority of state of underscore 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 have never had any lawful authority over the inhabitants, only over the fictions they create and the trustees of those fictions, never the sovereigns unless tricked into becoming a co-trustee. Fact number 8, in order to overcome the total lack of lawful authority over inhabitant in their bogus courts, a fictional constructive trust, your name spelled in all capitalization, in fact another federal instrumentality, is created under fraud to deceive the inhabitant into believing he is subject to the private copyrighted statutory whims of the de facto corporate government impersonator. Fact number 9, also called judges who in fact are in the business of enforcing private copyrighted statutes and codes, are judicial officers, but rather mere executive administrators of a private, for-profit, plunder, municipal corporation, having absolutely no legal/lawful authority over the sovereign inhabitants. Fact number 10, the United States and its instrumentalities, such as state of underscore 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 underscore, created constructive trusts named after inhabitants of the land, names spelled in all capital letters, in order to deceive the lawful inhabitants of his true identity and substantive rights and fraudulently make the inhabitants liable for the debts and obligations of the untied states and or its instrumentalities. Fact number 11, the United States and its instrumentalities, such as state of underscore 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 underscore, never recognize lawful inhabitants of the land, and only recognize the fictitious creations of the United States and its other instrumentalities. Fact number 12, the United States District Court as constituted in the several states a party to the Constitution are completely outlaw, illegitimate, constitutionally unauthorized, private courts impersonating the true Article 3 courts referred to as District Court of the United States, which no longer exist anywhere and cannot be elicited into existence by any known means. Fact number 13, the so-called Supreme Court of the United States is currently not functioning as an Article 3 constitutionally authorized court, but rather only as the High Admiralty Court. They consistently assert no comment when confronted with the simple question, are you the one Supreme Court described in Article 3 of the Constitution for the United States of America? Do you wonder why? Fact number 14, the corporate de facto democracy, not the de jure Republic United States of America, went into bankruptcy 1933, creating a legal vacuum, the void of which was filled by fiction's construct of fraud that led to the judicial system becoming the most corrupt legal system in the world without peer. An identified recent candidate for nomination to the Supreme Court of the United States, Edith Jones, appellate judge, publicly stated the American legal system is corrupt almost beyond recognition. Fact number 15, all so-called crimes are in fact strictly a commercial matter as stated in 27 CFR 72.11, Code of Federal Regulations. Fact number 16, ever since June 5, 1933, because of the bankruptcy of the United States, when House Joint Resolution 192 was unanimously passed and becoming public policy per Public Law 73-10, all products of the industrial/economic system are of legal/lawful necessity prepaid, i.e., everything must be paid for by the government to preclude the charges of high treason against Congress, Secretary of Treasury, Board of Governors of Federal Reserve Bank, and the Comptroller of the Currency. This is an historical, irrefutable fact that has been kept secret from you for over 93 years. Time to wake up, maybe. What can we conclude from these facts? Now, these particular assertions being stated as facts, the following conclusions can be readily arrived at. 1. Pursuing any remedy within the so-called courts is the proverbial barking up the wrong tree, since the so-called courts have an immense financial incentive, as much as $10,000 per day per inmate, to convict any and everyone. Innocent or guilty is totally irrelevant. The pretend court only take in the big bucks upon securing convictions at all costs, or as a compromise, obtain lucrative bribes from its victims. 2. There exist virtually no men/women of integrity left anywhere in the so-called judicial system, because potential whistleblowers are not tolerated. The exceptions are indeed far and few between, and those remaining few are virtually powerless to help you. 3. Much as the Chicago mobster Al Capone was virtually untouchable against the direct activities he engaged in, he was vulnerable indirectly through issues of taxation. 4. The courts, consisting of the clerk of the court, prosecutor, deputy prosecutor, pretend judge, and defense attorney, are all profoundly vulnerable to the issues of tax delinquency against their person for the bonds/bills, true bill, being generated off the credit of its accused victims as products of statutes. A product of a statute is nothing different than, let us say, a product of an industrial factory that builds automobile. All these products are indeed prepaid, yet the people in their profound ignorance are expected to somehow pay for these things, even though after the U.S. bankruptcy, the people no longer could pay their debt at law since it was now legally impossible. No precious metals backed the currency anymore after the confiscation of the gold by executive order. We forget who the real sovereigns are. It is precisely this inability of the people to pay at law their debts that empowers them under Public Law 73-10 to be able to exercise their exemption, exempt from paying, to achieve set-off, mutual cancellation of debt, for and all debts that the sovereign accepts. We are all sovereigns pursuant to the unanimous Declaration of Independence of July 4, 1776, making us subject to no other men, only God, the absolute sovereign. All men are created equal. Now, do you remember? We, being the sovereign, are the only source or commercial energy, so all funds that exist within the economy ultimately belong to a sovereign inhabitant on the land. No government has the capacity to generate any positive commercial energy, only to generate destruction, debt/death, and a pure parasitical existence upon the productive energy of the sovereign. These concepts are not some pick-in-the-sky mental exercise, but are the hard reality that the dark forces fully recognize and go to such lengths to keep hidden from us. With great ingenuity and cunning, the dark forces have attempted to totally neutralize these impediments to achieving total enslavement of the sovereigns by making them think they are subject to their servants, the greatest of all con jobs in the history of man. Is there anything we can do? So how do we turn the table on the greed, total corruption, and infinite evil in control of this wicked system, to assert our sovereignty, to restore the de jure republic where everyone is a sovereign with no subjects, and put a stop to the domestic terrorism, rape, robbery, and pillaging being committed against the sovereign? Should we just wait for the promised divine destruction of the entire global system as guaranteed to eventually happen in scriptures, that admittedly has a 1000% batting average so far, or if we have the knowledge to do so, to put into actions that can free the unjustly incarcerated and help set up circumstances that can severely curtail, if not cause, to implode upon itself by its own accord, the criminal enterprise impersonating a judicial system. Since the criminal enterprise impersonating the judicial system is protected/supported and mutually profiting from the plunder they generate, all the way to the Supreme Courts of both state and federal venues, they actually are in the same one federal system. Since the state is a mere federal instrumentality, then we must seek remedy outside of the state and federal so-called government, de facto, that has a superior position. The United States, under its federal instrumentalities such as the state of all went bankruptcy in 1933 and went in receivership. The creditor in the bankruptcy is the International Monetary Fund, IMF, World Bank, which uses their collection/enforcement branch, called the Internal Revenue Service, to service payments into the phony bankruptcy that is being used as a subterfuge to extort money from the people through the income tax scam. The federal tax forms provide a tool for remedy. The federal tax form always suggests the use for extortion of funds from individuals is the Form 1040, OMB number 1545-0074, even though upon examination of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, congressionally mandated listings of what this form is to be used for show absolutely no applicability to the subject of individual income tax. It is totally purposeless to protest any aspect of the surrealistic income tax scam. The form totally supports your tax position you would be asserting. An example federal tax form 1040 filed for John Q. DOE, all capital letters designates a legal fiction/trust entity/fiction, is provided. Notice that the perjury statement states that you have examined the return and accompanying schedules and statements you make, and to the best of your knowledge and belief it is true, correct, and complete. This will work to your favor, as we shall see would protect you. I call your attention to line 21, its attachment, which contains a statement that certain issues were being held by recipients. The eligible issues are the listed items. In the example, the appearance bond for case #CR555555 was listed. Since this bond was issued your identity as the commercial entity backing the bond, even though the appearance bond may have only been posted at arraignment and never actually exercised, this changes nothing in the nature of the bond itself. What is necessary to understand is that the bond is issued, posted, and obtain its value, commercial energy, from the credit/commercial energy of the actual living soul, the principal creditor that is being involved, compelled to appear. One may think the appearance bond is worthless document if not exercised to obtain release until trial. But in fact, it is a commercial instrument having commercial value. Remember, all crimes are commercial, equal to the assigned amount. The prison/penal bonds. In fact, there also exist other bonds issued in a case, which are so-called penal bonds, consisting of a series of 3 or 6 bonds, all having OMB #9000-0045. It is these bonds, not shown in the example, which are all created behind your back without your knowledge or permission, yet receive their commercial energy from the living sovereign. It is our understanding that these bonds are valued at $2 billion, million, per count, where the counts is the number of counts in the true bill indictment and/or the counts of conviction. The first 3 bonds are the bid bond, SF24, performance bond, SF25, and the payment bond, SF25A. The next 3 bonds with the same OMB number 9000-0045 are the Miller Act bonds, SF273, SF274, SF275, which may or may not apply to a state case as opposed to federal cases. Each bond issued would constitute a so-called roll, so the total sum of all these penal bonds could be 3 or 6 times $2 billion, million, times the number of counts. All these bonds are 1099 OID eligible issues. If you were to also list these as 1099 OID eligible issues, the amounts becomes quite large, and the numbers showing up on line 21 and 64 of the federal tax return 1040 would be considerably larger. For simplicity of example, they are not included, only the appearance bond, but can most certainly be included also. The description of these bonds would be all OMB hashtag 9000-0045 bonds for case hashtag CR 555555 stave underscore 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 V John Q. DOE. In addition to these case-related bonds, one can also include such eligible issues as traffic tickets, commercial bills of any sort, tax bills, court judgments, in fact any and all commercial presentments, whether issued to you or by you. Remember, all the products of the economic system are prepaid by virtue of public policy and public law, P.L. 73-10, arising out of the necessity of their no longer existing constitutionally authorized money to pay at law with. Once they took away our gold/silver backing of the currency, that is mandated by our organic constitution in Article 1, Section 10, making it impossible to pay at law for anything, the party, government, that seized the gold most under public policy, pay the bills for us. It is our very inability to pay at law as a result of the executive order seizing the gold in 1933 that gives us the ability/authority to demand that the items be treated as prepaid. As hard as this might be to accept because of your brainwashing by the global economy prison you have lived in your entire life. Public policy mandated by 73-10, HJR 192, is an irrefutable fact of life, and many thousands of people have known of this reality all along but kept the truth from you. The 1099 OID taxes the eligible issue back to source. All these eligible issues can be indeed processed via a 1099 OID filing in order to tax the issue back to the source, ultimately you, for settlement and closing of escrow in exchange, without money, Treasury Direct, SS hashtag, Social Security hashtag. The 1099 OID essentially allows the issuing party to volunteer the issues as to be taxed. These issues were previously in fact delinquent, deferred taxes that had the appearance of being abandoned property in that you never made any claim upon them. Upon identifying the eligible issues, we force these funds to be set aside in essentially a demand deposit account as a federal withholding for recovery as a refund on Form 1040 at line 64. The 1040 establishes the title to the eligible issues as. The 1040 form simply identifies title to the 1099 OID eligible issues as both being income to you, line 21, and as federal withholding, line 64. The commercial instruments/presentments only obtain commercial energy/value from you, so you are the source, the principal creditor. However, since you never received actual spendable funds, when they bill you, they fail to enclose a check to pay with a dishonor. In fact, the amount in question is all in a withholding status at the time of filing the 1040. The 1040 OID filed earlier affected the federal withholding on the funds that were being privately withheld, in reality, a delinquent deferred tax, contraband, kept hidden from you unless you learn of its existence and tax it back. A few other line items on the 1040 need to be clarified. Since I have nothing to gain by claiming any exemption, actually, only a partial exemption at that, I simply do not bother and put down, tired face. It really does not matter. Also, on line 40, I take no deductions, because they are irrelevant to me. Now comes the more interesting part on line 44, the tax. Notice that the line says, see, page 37. Does that parenthetically enclosed phrase infer any legal duty you are swearing under penalty of perjury to have performed? Any items enclosed in parentheses or brackets are strictly considered removed from the document in the legal sense but not always strictly adhered to. However, in an ever more fundamental sense, nothing on this page 37 is in any way legally incorporated as being a part of the 1040 from which you are attesting to only. Line 44 is somewhat cleverly constructed to trick you into assessing yourself some non-zero amount. As any serious student of income tax law has had drilled into his head, the individual income tax is voluntary, contrary to everything you have ever been led to believe. Only the taxpayer can assess himself. The IRS has absolutely no legal authority to assess the tax even though they will try to bluff you. The form, line 44, does not in any way preclude you from entering a zero. Even if they attempted to force you to assess a non-zero amount, you could simply 1099 OID that amount and tax that back to source also. They cannot win on this issue. Filing the 1099 OID. The example shows a 1099 OID and the accompanying 1096 that must go with it. The two sample enclosed letters show the correspondence sent to the prosecutor asking him to please file the 1099 OID. It is also recommended that the clerk of court and all assistant prosecutors in your case, the judge, also be added to the parties contacted. Since the people contacted all will refuse to file the 1099 OIDs usually, even though it is required of them, they will all be in dishonor and become as such eligible to appear in the report as a recipient of the payer. The head prosecutor, as far as we are concerned, was the payer, who in actuality was paid from your account, without your knowledge or consent, which translates to stealing your exemption. So in a sense you yourself were the hidden payer, the prosecutor acting as your agent without your knowledge. Normally, the filler of the Form 1099 is the same party as the payer, but the fraud caused you to have to be the filler out of necessity. Every party who dishonored your first letter has become holder due course of the federal liability, and hence should be listed in the recipient box by stating holder in due course. Date of dishonored is the date of first letter. There can be multiple recipients to the same eligible issues. In a sense, these dishonored parties share the liability, i.e., individually and severally, consistent with UCC holder in due course protocol. In those cases you issue as the payer an international bill of exchange, IBOE, or an international promissory note, IPN, the preferred instrument to use in conformance to the UNCITRAL Convention on International Bills of Exchange and International Promissory Notes. To say a court of court for a fine or court cost, the recipient would be the clerk of court, and the payer is you, instead of the agent of you, a so-called public servant. Any and everything issued that receives its commercial value from you via your exemption has as its source, you. In conclusion, this paper is highly condensed, out of necessity, explanation of what you can do and who you really are. If you are operating with this described procedure, you are in complete conformance to the letter and intent of the law. The system may choose to attempt to intimidate you into not laying claim to what is rightfully yours. Do you understand it well enough to be the belligerent claimant? Satan's system does not want you to assert yourself. They will try to intimidate you into silence and acquiescence of the docile economic slave you currently are. All it takes is for evil to prevail, is for good men to do nothing. To quote Teddy Roosevelt, one of the greatest shortcomings in contemporary society is the ability of many to distinguish between right and wrong, good and evil, as well as the lack of the spirit to fight against injustice. Fundamentally, peace and our humanity must be backed by the spirit to challenge what is wrong. A peace that acquiescence to rampant iniquity represents the bleak stillness of a spiritual graveyard. Shutting one's eyes to injustice is not tolerance, it is little more than to cowardice and apathy. It is to those who agree with this paper is dedicated and addressed to. End. Afterthoughts. It was not made clear in the previous discussion how and why this procedure affects the release of the individual. The corpus, body, is being warehoused by prison system as surety/collateral for the commercial instruments by the pretend courts discussed earlier. The Criminal RICO, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, enterprise uses your exemption to provide the commercial energy to give it value. When these commercial instrument eligible issues are taxed back to source by the sovereign, who in fact is the ultimate source, the accused has now successfully closed escrow on the Treasury Direct, your SS hashtag, so no shorty can now be maintained on the instrument. Also, since the escrow is closed, the means of stealing from one's exemption is closed off. One needs an open escrow to scam the account. Therefore, they can no longer pay for any funds. Someone in the system will have to become the scapegoat and go to prison, effectively replacing you. Also, as some have correctly guessed, this method can be used to eliminate mortgages, car loans, and credit card balances since all these contracts are all totally fraudulent. The so-called lender never lent you any money, they have nothing at risk. They simply stole the funds for the alleged loan from your exemption, to trick you into paying back what they never lent you. This is the ultimate scam indeed. This subject is, however, beyond the scope of this paper. An overlooked idea. There is one single overlooked idea in the commercial activities we are involved and engaged in, and too many thoughts may overshadow the answer. Whatever venture we are engaged with, we will be unable to make settlement because there is no closure on the issue. The reason is there is no return to the source. That return cannot be made by dollars because dollars are measured in whole numbers. A return to the source must be made electronically, so therefore the units of measure must be in international units of revenue, not dollars revenue. You should not attempt to purchase something that is in the wrong venue. You need to be in the revenue. And since we identify the international unit as revenue, that is what must be used to pay a bill. The only way we have found to obtain revenue to do this is to have your tax preparer file Federal Tax Form 1099 OID on the issue and ask him to give you an advance on the tax refund. The tax refund comes from the source, as that is where the 1099 report returns to the source. You must remember that the revenue travels in electronic circuits in return to the source. Dollars are not eligible units to travel electronically as they are measured in whole numbers. Dollars go wire transfer, which originates with a dead instrument. Maybe I can simplify my comments by saying you might take your bills to H&R Block and ask them to file the Federal Tax Form 1099 OID on your issues and give you the advance on the tax refund. H&R Block will get the tax refund based on the discount to maturity. Thus your advance will come in tax-paid dollars, a closed escrow no longer open to the public. It is these open escrows where criminal charges are taken from and assumed when escrow closes, with the voluntary 1099 tax report. There is no longer anywhere for agent provocateurs to assume charges from. All the actions against us come from open escrows, so after filing Federal Tax Form 1099 OID on the issue, the tax is returned to the source and escrow closes. I don't believe that a case can be maintained against one if the 1099 is filed and the escrow is closed, because that tax is now paid, no debt. So, the escrow is still open, and that is where the assumed charges come from. The guilty/not guilty issue is applicable, but only in tax deferrals, as that is where they assume their charges are from open escrow. But when we get the tax preparer to file the 1099 OID on the particular issue in question, the dollars become revenue, a tax, by the voluntary confession and return to source, Treasury Direct, #your/the SS hashtag. This source is a mutual fund held by the county attorney, and that mutual fund was purchased with a blocked grant that used your foreign credit blocked therein to enable someone, agent provocateur, to assume the use of these funds in a true bill against you. Adolf Hitler had a conversation with his finance minister in which he said things that will make clear where contrary claims come from. This was discovered in the book The 20th Century Journey by William Shire, where he tells of Hitler's question to his finance minister. He said, "We have made the political decision to build up our military in violation of the treaty, so how are we going to finance the buildup?" The finance minister said, "First, you will need to use the printing press. Second, we have confiscated enormous amounts of Jewish property. And third, we will block the foreign credit that will enable you to use the credit of your political enemies to build up your military." So, what you see there is the formula for a blocked grant as the means to derive foreign, private, credit from the rolls of residents of municipalities in the county that is run by the county attorney and the one who prosecutes you on charges therefrom. These blocked grants are the credit used by the county attorney to purchase mutual funds that are the source of revenue used to finance the product of those who bring bills against you. These mutual funds are the derivatives used to finance the IMF and are the source the 1099 instructions refer to. So when we get a bill from a merchant or vendor, that bill was financed by the source that is measured in international units that can travel in electronic circuits in return, tax return, to the source. Whereas, dollars measured in whole numbers cannot pass through an electronic circuit. Here is where the bill must be reported voluntarily on Federal Tax Form 1099-01D to identify those dollars as tax revenue and thus eligible to pass to the source for settlement and closing in exchange. Treasury Direct, #your SS hashtag. Another way to identify the source, mutual fund, is the source is exempt from state and municipal taxes, but not federal. That the reason to file Federal Tax Form 1099 OID on the particular issue is to tax the sum of the bill back to the source. H&R Block can do that as you take your bills to them and have them report on the said 1099 OID, and you can get an advance on the tax refund immediately. They advertise on TV how fast and easy you can get an advance on your tax return. Everyone assumes a tax return is a 1040, but there are lots of tax reporting forms, and the 1099s are some of them, only they are voluntary reporting. They are not mandatory like the others. But nevertheless, the reporting identifies the source as a small claim expressed in international units and eligible for a judgment to enforce tax recovery in small claims court. That judgment can be extended to, say, an order for release of prisoners held as collateral. Thus, this becomes a habeas corpus. The quiet title and ejectment actions would only apply after the said 1099 OID return is made, as it is after getting the escrow closed by the tax return to the source that one has actual settlement. In fact, I don't think the mirror image is going to have much effect with the business, because the mirror is relating to things and accounts of whole items measured in whole numbers, and we are talking about charges that can pass through electronic circuits as a matter of fact, so it looks like this reduces the idea down to a very small unit of a single source, thus one world order. With that idea in mind, we don't look at a credit as opposed to a debit like in a mirror image, but the two are one and the same, thus one world order. I think the accrual accounting methods will bear this out. It is the national currency that is not eligible to pay these debts, because the international units I am referring to are derivatives leveraged 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times the numbers we need not be concerned with. We only need be concerned with the bill we have for ourselves to make settlement on. That is done by taking our bills, includes indictments, to the H&R Block tax preparer and request he file 1099 OID on the issue for return, a tax return, to the source, the mutual fund, for settlement and closing in exchange Treasury Direct. Then, after filing the said 1099 OID, ask for your advance on the tax refund. You will be paid the discount to maturity, and H&R Block will get your tax refund to balance their books. Something else should be said here about national currency. These are issues from our national, federal, reserve, and are not international currency. The international currency, IMF, derives from municipal reserves, mutual funds, that are obtained by the county attorneys like I mentioned earlier, and are a small claim by virtue of the international unit of measure used to account the sum of a bill. Thus, a small claim court is an international court. When admitting to be a debtor in possession is to admit to a tax liability because the debt has not been paid. One must request the 1099 OID be filed on the issue to settle the tax liability. There must be a return to source for settlement and closing. So it is the national reserves that created national currency. It is municipal reserves that create international currency, IMF. These each have a different value and different character to their nature, thus the national currency dollars cannot pass through electronic funds transfer circuits like international units of revenue does. It's like speaking a foreign language one to another. And how to get our remedy. The central idea is in the federal tax form 1099 OID that I have written about, but now, to advance into action for the remedy, we here have discovered that the small claims court has two main reasons one can file for action. First is the $3,000 limit that we cannot use because it doesn't provide enough relief dollars to settle the controversy. So, second, it provides for one to sue for tax recovery. Now we are getting somewhere. This small claim action enables us to obtain enforcement of the federal tax form 1099 OID issue because that filing is voluntary, and it defines the small claim issue because that filing is voluntary, and it defines the small claim issue as a tax requested to return to source, so that is eligible in the small claim court to sue for tax recovery defined in the federal tax form 1099 OID request to file and return the issue to source. Now, when the request for the federal tax form 1099 OID is refused/dishonored, you can file the small claim on small claim court, with the dishonored contract being a contempt of court, whereby you send the sheriff to purge the contempt by obtaining their check for the amount of tax recovery sought and release to your possession of all the property in controversy, or arrest and take the offender into custody and held until he pays. Now, here's where everyone fails in their thinking. Because how does one Q4 say $200,000 in a small claim when the dollars amount appears to exceed the $3,000 small claim court limit? Here is why. The US dollar amount is the venue and is a delinquent tax issue in a deferred debt somewhere. So, what you are pursuing is a tax recovery that is expressed in international units of revenue, thus a new venue or revenue. Accrual accounting brings it back to tired face. The reason this is because the tax recovery revenue is in negative numbers, less than one whole number, and qualifies as a small claim, whereas the claim in dollars are assumed to be in whole numbers. Therefore, you can see the difference between delinquent tax dollars and delinquent tax recovery revenue. The revenue is the small claim, exempt, and the dollars are delinquent tax deferrals in debt instruments held by someone, probably by the county attorney. Statutes at large, not a small claim. Once the issue is returned to source, that amount is eligible to be paid in dollars, tax-paid dollars prepaid. So the property and the dollars must be released to you as a matter of public policy, and it contains the real amount of damages one would otherwise have sustained and expressed in dollars. So, with that in mind, I think a good idea to name the county attorney along with the SBA or banks or whoever had an active role in taking the property in question. Probably those who are paying the delinquent dollars in alleged taxes that are not yet returned to source, thus they are delinquent taxes eligible for tax recovery action as a small claim as said above. So, I hope you can see the full scope of the action to take for your remedy. When you fully absorb the meaning of all this, you should begin to realize why there is no remedy in any court. Most of us have observed these last years. The basic reason is because everyone has expressed their claims in whole dollars, whether dealing with government, corporations, or agency, and since those are all offerings of revenue, they are dealing in international units of revenue, not dollars. We have simply not been speaking the same language, and everyone goes down in defeat as a result. Also, a basic flaw with everyone is that the claim must be confessed volunteered on 1099 and not protested, because the protest causes a barrier to the tax recovery as a dishonor, and our accusers use the dishonor as their revenue and a tax deferral until we are able to obtain the small claim judgment to compel them to return, a tax return, the issue to the source. Then too, you will not want to refer to your small claim in any plural reference. The small claims court, using the plural reference, is the public claim of collective and multiple claims of dollars that need a broker to break them apart for you, and there are no private individuals identified, as the filing of 1099 is not mandatory, thus it is an individual, single private claim. So, that claim is singular, a small claim, even though there may be numerous public entries into the account. So, keep your reference to your claim a small claim in small claims court. It is thus an identifiable tax charge when the request for Federal Tax Form 1099 OID is requested on the issue to return to the source. Thus, we have a voluntary tax to report income tax, etc. The voluntary request for the tax report marks the item as a private account exempt from lien or levy. Income tax is voluntary and not mandatory. It is drawn in by magnetic energy/charge, thus a withdrawal being the method of taking it into account. Attraction. In a letter I had sent, I had made a request for the Federal Tax Form 1099 OID that went to the county attorney, et al., and it includes a request to return/release all my property subsequent to this issue. That includes my body. That is the acceptance and return of their offer of the bond amount that was set on me in court. So, his dishonor of that request is the cause for my small claim for tax recovery in small claims court. The dishonor is a treasury bill, in this respect, eligible for commodity market exchange. So we can see in all of this that the source of issue is the taxpayer and the tax recovery or tax return is the tax collector. So, we, or our straw man, are both payer and collector, but we have this accomplished by our employees, IRS, corporate agency, etc. This is why we request of them to file Federal Tax Form 1099 OID to identify the issue as a delinquent tax that we can sue for tax recovery and subsequent release and return of property. With that, I think you have enough information to start an action for recovery of your property and the revenue to operate it. Maybe we are looking at a new frontier and new settlements on that frontier. 1099 OID notes on November 17, 2005. It can be seen from the chart that gold increases from grantor to the Federal Reserve. This is showing the use of derivatives to enlarge the superfund. But for the bill to return to the Federal Reserve via the U.S. agent, the Federal Tax Form 1099 OID is needed to identify the currency as revenue and not tax delinquent dollars. This simply means the issue identified by 1099 must return to the source before the resulting property can be returned or released to the owner. Because whoever is the agent who receives the return to source must pay the amount to the owner at owner's request to balance his books. So it is the issue returning to source that brings the charge to neutral, whereby the amount paid out to owner is tax-paid dollars, prepaid, and debts are gone from the account. The exemption is merely the tax charge going to tired face in the agent's trust account after returning to the owner the tax-paid dollars. The agent doesn't get the exemption until actually paying the owner, although he probably assumes he has it, so this is the reason Federal Tax Form 1099 OID should be volunteered to displace the assumption with a fact. The request for your agent to file Federal Tax Form 1099 OID on the particular issue identifies the agent as a tax protester. If he fails to do as you ask, ye have not because ye ask not. The problem is with the whole numbers we have had in dollars that the HGR 192 chart shows as expansion of gold increase. But the increase that occurs or seems to occur because of so many more dollars to represent a particular property item. Even though there are more dollars representing the value of a particular property, the property is still the same and has not increased like the dollars seem to have increased. So the problem is to realize that there are two different values put on a dollar, as one is US dollars expressed in whole numbers and the other in revenue expressed in international units of revenue, leveraged by brokers and attorneys by derivatives attaching a municipal tax account and increasing the debt by 000, adding the 3 zeros to multiply the revenue into international units of revenue. Thus there is an illusion of inflation and expansion of the property value, when actually what happens is the account goes inverse and the numbers being negative go forever small, thus the small claim in a small claims court. It seems we must go from our old values of whole dollars into the new values of revenue, as the increased numbers identify the property that was represented by lesser dollars of earlier or prior issue, thus priority. So here we find the reason for voluntary reporting of a tax to charge a return to source. Thus the tax is charged to close the circuit where there was no charge before, because it was assumed and thereby no charge. It was trumped up to accuse the victim with an assumed probable cause that forces the accused victim to voluntarily accept/charge a tax return as a matter of fact to displace the assumed charges, which is no charge that continues as a tax-deferred debt until a tax charge in fact returns the issue to the source. Thus the reason to ask for Federal Tax Form 1099 OID be filed on the issue. That request identifies the particular issue as a delinquent tax, which changes to whole numbers of value to international units of revenue, which the prior dollars have been multiplied by 1,000, 1K, as a mill levy to increase revenues in the international community. It is a voluntary request for the Federal Tax Form 1099 OID that identifies the energy charged in the property to enable an identification of private property to be made. Without that request, voluntarily, the particular issue in question is assumed to be public property and the prior debt continues on in a tax deferral of some sort, gathering interest, increasing the national domestic debt. So the biggest problem I see is that people have all these theories found in research of the statutes, but they fail to grasp what happens to a dollar when its value changes 1,000 times itself. One must volunteer the tax information so the issue, the body, does not fall into execution of law. Executions are unlawful as the tax, 1099, is not mandatory, so they must be voluntary to enable the taxed issue to return to source and settlement, and closing in exchange can occur. This cannot occur by an execution, public law, but by agreement, because the redeemer does not live in false claims. If we agree and accept the probable cause alleged, and request Federal Tax Form 1099 OID to tax the issue back to the source, there is no longer a false claim, and the debt can be redeemed by the tax charging the circuit, escrow, to close in settlement. Let's say a debt from a mortgage is the issue. Mortgage $1,000 mortgage is sold to new owner who multiplies to $1,000. X000 equals $1 million. The $1 million is the new value on the body, property, for which community service obtains grants, blocked grants. In lieu of the taxes, they can no longer pass bonding issues in the local community. The people vote them down. The funds are raised by assuming tax revenues from the victim's municipal tax liability, from which they obtain cash advances by bidding and holding mutual funds that provide liquid funds for public use, deferrals, while the victim's account in the municipality has been charged as collateral on the advance, a tax liability. Blocked grants are funded with foreign credit, which enables the agents provocateurs to use the credit of their political enemies to carry out their sinister purpose. Are we not foreign to the public, being private? Then whose credit has gone into the blocked grants? Are these from H&R Block? H&R Block stock trading in the market? So unless there is a voluntary request for reporting the said tax, there is no fact to identify property free of tax liability. So no matter what sort of rationalizing one does to use administrative and court procedures to set off or set aside, or otherwise discharge the debt obligation, to dispose of the debt, one cannot get rid of the debt, because the public has no mandatory powers to redeem debt issues, but only use deferrals that declare the debt paid but is only deferred into the hands of someone who agrees to hold the debt in whatever type the interest-bearing debt is placed. So the one option to all of this is to volunteer a request to file federal tax forms 1099 OID to charge the tax on the issue for its return to the source. Now there is a fact to take the charged issue into account and dispose of the debt by the balance going to tired face. Now some of the administrative procedures might work because the dollars have been taken from the old venue US dollars and reissued in the new revenue as international units, a small claim eligible to file for tax recovery in small claim court. So, one can see the old venue dollars do not have the same relative value to particular property that the revenue has, as the county has taken all their tax accounts and sold or traded them for revenue measured in international units that are mutual funds valued in this assessment multiplied by 1,000, 1K. These dollars of revenue are now a small claim because they are voluntarily identified in the request for federal tax form 1099 OID to tax the particular issue back to the source, and are eligible in small claims court to sue for tax recovery and obtain a judgment to enforce the return to source. I can't stress this enough, that it takes the individual effort to request federal tax form 1099 OID to be filed on the issue to make it a small claim. Any other effect leaves the dollars in the account delinquent because they do not have the means to become a small claim until the principal accused requests the tax be reported and taken into the new venue called revenue. After this occurs, then the dollars can be sought in small claims court. After this occurs, then the dollars can be sought in small claims court in a tax recovery action. But without the request for the tax report, 1099, the dollars are delinquent contraband because they have not been identified as tax revenue and they are not eligible as a small claim to enforce recovery. They must go to the source dollar for dollar to fulfill HJR 192 as a matter of public policy, and when that happens, the property expressed by that debt becomes free of debt. The foregoing explanation might not be perfect in its identification of the subject's relative matters, but it should improve your outlook on the problem. More thoughts on the 1099 OID January 9, 2006. Let us discuss the nature of what sets the parameters for a tax return. The word return means to go the opposite way, and we have always thought of taxes as indeed something we paid and sent away from us. So, if that be so, then to return would come back to us. So, the word withdraw would be an expression that describes this. But first one should examine the tax in relation to return. If our opponents assume they are exempt from tax, they also assume we are liable for the same, thus they accuse us, thinking we must pay. So we need to identify the source of the taxable revenue so we know where to return to source as per the purpose of Federal Tax Form 1099 OID. That suggests the source belongs to us, and the 1099 report confesses the return to the source. So, now we need to prove this in both federal and state positions on this. This then puts the matter under the superintendent of a federal project to regulate the funds from the source into commercial use and then back to source. You remember my mention of a blocked grant that is used by a county attorney to use the credit blocked yours and my foreign credit. We are foreign to the attorney at bar to purchase the mutual fund that in turn uses those funds to purchase municipal bonds that they claim are exempt from state and municipal taxes, but they are not exempt from federal tax, thus Federal Tax Form 1099 OID. It is these funds that finance all the products that bills arise from in the municipal construction contracts and related federal projects. The municipal funds are the source for which the tax returns to. But remember, it was our credit that the county attorney used to purchase those same said funds. So, when we volunteer to file/report federal tax form 1099 OID for the issue to return to source, we have sent the confession back to source, and since it is only a confession, as there is no money, as per HJR 192, we are entitled to a tax refund, because the confession admits the amount of tax, but does not pay any. So the principal is eligible for the tax refund. It is suggested that H&R Block do the tax report and provide you with an advance on the tax refund. But no doubt they will demur or otherwise dishonor the request. So now the dishonor has the bills incorporated into the negative contract and identify the principal, both negative and positive identities. The dishonors is the contract in fact and eligible for one to ask the H&R Block agent to place the request for federal tax form 1099 OID be filed on the issue for return to the source and issue an advance on the tax return. The H&R Block agent can now be asked to place the request with a supervisor to complete as said above. The supervisor is the agent of the superintendent of the federal project, and the H&R Block agent has the obligation to file but refuses and creates the dishonor which is eligible for the supervisor to enter the superfund, municipal and mutual fund, for the advance requested. So the superintendent of the federal project is where the federal tax authority comes from, as the states cannot create their own specie. Thus it is the supervisor who has the authority to enter the superfund for the tax refund. He has the supervision to see the small claim expressed in international units of revenue. Now the body can see. Is that a bill of lading? It might help to remember that the individual accounts that are derivatives from the tax roll of a municipality are considered residents thereof, and it is their credit that is blocked into, and with a federal grant, being as foreign credit of political enemies, that is used by the county attorney to purchase the mutual funds that subsequently funds the municipality for all their social and mechanical construction projects technically regulated or governed by the Corps of Engineers. Army Corps of Engineers. The Social Security number as an electronic profile terminal is probably the transmitting utility. This is all under the superintendent of a federal project. A supervisor. Governor of the fund. But now to further understand how this is organized is to identify who and what the Army engineers really are. When Abe Lincoln pressed the Civil War on the Confederate States, it was to preserve the Union. Now, what union is that? Is it not the Union of Operating Engineers, who have exclusive credit to bid on municipal construction projects, thus first access to municipal funds for approved projects? And are not the NATO forces of Europe the Union deployed in foreign service? Thus we have the merger of the metric system of Europe with our system. The metric system being negative numbers going to infinity. And is not this negative connection, union, the nexus for electronic funds transfer, EFT, between public and private bank accounts? Euro funds on dollars are US dollars in private accounts. So, with that in mind, it appears that the euro dollars are expressed in international currency. Because the metric system represents the euros on the east side of the decimal point, and US currency is on the west side expressed in whole numbers, somehow, I suspect, this nexus or union is bound together for the one world order, a money order. Thus equal partners, where credits equal debits bound into contract, by dishonor, and the resulting dishonor being the contract in fact, and contains the bill admitting the particular issue from the source, mutual fund, and the acceptance of the bill, view request for filing federal tax form 1099 OID on the issues for return to the source. It appears that the bill is in national currency, asking for national currency, but since we are dispossessed, HJR 192, we admit/accept the bill and its promise to pay, by request for filing federal tax form 1099 OID on the particular issue, and ask for an advance on the tax refund. It is the union, nexus, that connects or binds the negative agreement together, dishonor, to enable the electronic transmission to pass through the source and return to the source, both credit and debt now joined together in one holy union of wedlock, thus one world order for a refund in international units of revenue from euros into US national currency. The blocked grant used by the county attorney to block our foreign credit identifies the three wise men coming from the East to fund the particular issue when referring to foreigners, and since we rely on employees to conduct our business, we request them to file federal tax form 1099 OID on the issue for return to source and advance the tax refund. 3 wise men 000, 3 bags full. The promise to pay is made by the banker, our banker, and he is the taxpayer, but for our account. And the bank is regulated by the superintendent of the federal project, so it is the Army Corps of Engineers, the union, that does the electronic transfer via a supervisor who has supervision to enable him to see the small claim and give the advance on the refund. I think an advance may be the only way one can get settlement on the issue, because the promise to pay is a Federal Reserve note and that is a future event, so it is the advance that moves us to the future of that promise. The passover is the exchange of the bill for the bond passing over, not through the promised land, which is a foreign land, thus euros. So, the union holds the bill and bond together in one world order to establish the refund to be made, or the advance on the same. So, with that scene in mind, you might be able to see that the T-bill and T-bond together make up the T-note, promissory note, and it is the union of the T-bill and T-bond, foreign and domestic, that equals the promise to pay. These two opposing items are bound together in dishonor, and that fact thereby admits the promise to pay the sum. The summary to court, small claim, etc. Thus, the shotgun wedding. The honor and dishonor of a commercial contract is one opposed to the other. The first is in the venue, and the other is the revenue. The honor of a contract is in national currency. The dishonor is an international contract, measured in international units of revenue. The dishonor is eligible to request the supervisor make the settlement as she is authorized to enter the superfund for the closing as that is under the superintendent of a federal project. Notes on 1099 OID, January 21, 2006. I have not been real concerned with the bid bonds and the Admiralty because they govern matters of delivery to a distribution point, but does not determine who is the owner, as that is a tax matter in the land, and not at sea where the Admiralty has jurisdiction. The matter that needs an answer is what credit or pledge for payment was used to develop the product expressed in the bill of lading on the particular vessel at sea or in the dock. This is what the probable cause is based upon, to accuse the owner there of the international method of identifying the owner, and since that agreement honored would be a national contract, that would not be sufficient to settle the foreign claims on the product of international affairs. So the contract of dishonor is necessary to bind the contrary powers together in a negative agreement, and to do this, the particular owner must report the tax, so it can be identified as an international unit of revenue, a small claim, and not national currency, which is tax delinquent. So the first step to take when one gets a bill is to request the accuser, accountant, of the bill to file federal tax form 1099 OID on the issue for settlement in return to source. Once that is done, the tax identifies the source by which the product of the bill was financed and returned to a tax return, i.e. 1099 OID. This is because the source is your SSN #Treasury Direct and cannot be reached for settlement unless the tax report passes through the electronic circuit connected to your Social Security account number. Treasury Direct corporations do not have Social Security numbers and cannot reach that account except through your very own SS #. All the Admiralty proceedings and bonds bid and issued thereby are irrelevant, because they are all dependent upon the original issue of capital that financed the creation of products that the bill arose from, and it is the mutual, fund, and municipal bonds purchased and held in the county, exempt from state and municipal taxes, that funded the engineering and construction of the product you are billed for. But that product is not exempt from federal tax, thus federal tax form 1099 OID is in order to file on that particular issue which identifies the owner at Treasury Direct. That is identified in the accrual accounting. So, you see from the association and nexus of events, the Admiralty proceedings are not the issue. The issue is the tax report 1099 OID, original issue discount, to connect the mutual fund and municipal bonds financing of the product to the end user and owner of the particular product and issue, for the tax return to source. This is what the federal project is, that authorized the county attorney to block our credit in the municipality where we are residents thereof and use that derivative to finance the international operations using the bid bonds for mechanical and social engineering of consumer goods and services that are prepaid at the source, and federal tax form 1099 OID identifies that issue for return to the source for settlement and closing in exchange Treasury Direct. This all falls under the superintendent of a federal project who oversees the cost of production returned to the source, from the mutual fund in the blocked grant to the construction project of the municipal contract and the tax return to the source to identify the source of original issue, thus the reason for federal tax form 1099 OID. Original issue discount, a prepaid event. I hope you are able to follow through what I described above. You need to see the county attorney holds the funds, mutual funds, that fund the federal project mentioned, and those same said funds are that prepay all the bills arising from the product thereof. When you receive a bill for a product of those original issue funds, you need to request federal tax form 1099 OID be filed on the issue to identify your account from which the county attorney took your credit and purchased bid for the mutual fund, which prepaid your account with those funds now identified as international units of revenue prepaid. It is the Union of Operating Engineers that use that credit to purchase all raw materials and labor to produce and finish the products you use and receive a bill for. The bids, bid bond, are all municipal contracts, construction contracts, that must have your acceptance of the finished product to certify the contractor's completion of the product, all under the superintendent of the federal project as said before. Thus, to prove prepayment, one needs to request federal tax form 1099 OID be filed on the particular issue for return to source for settlement and closing in exchange Treasury Direct. So, from this you should see that the county attorney holds the funds that prepay the bills you receive for what you use, and the superintendent of the federal project supervises the tax return to the source to identify the prepaid funds as yours by a charge to the electronic circuit via the federal tax form 1099 OID as said before. The state and municipality are exempt from making this determination. It is a federal matter because the revenue is prepaid in dollars, as the state cannot issue its own specie. 1099 OID Notes, February 11, 2006. Hopefully you can now see that no matter what part of a financial account in which one has involvement, it still is eligible for one to request federal tax form 1099 OID to be filed. All accounts, whether credit or debt, are interrelated and part of your account if you request the reporting and filing of it. So for example, we showed that a commissary account here at the prison is one such account they are not obligated to file at the inmate's request, even if they claim not to be liable for the indictment, true bill, or the appearance bond, etc., because even the commissary account is connected to all other accounts. So, from this I hope you can see all transactions connected to our names, item Son and Strawman name, are reportable this way and admit to zero, tired face. Why, tired face? Because the mutual fund was purchased with credit, nothing more. But, it was our credit. And when reported on 1099 OID, it goes to tired face, whether it is reported as a credit or debit. If the report shows us as recipient rather than payer, then where is the amount paid to us? Who has it now? So, whether the 1099 OID report goes as a credit or a debit to our name, it is still tired face. So, one should take all his receipts for credits and debits to age and are blocked for preparation and filing, and ask for an advance on the tax refund. When one gets a bill, presentation, for something and accepts it for value and returns it for settlement, and that settlement is refused or otherwise dishonored, that dishonor is an international contract eligible for one to request it be placed with a supervisor for payment/settlement in international units of revenue, revenue. The supervisor is authorized to give the tax refund identified in the contract of dishonor. The supervisor is an administrator of the Superfund, the IMF, and the value is recognized by reporting the tax on the 1099 OID. But it is when the 1099 OID request for reporting is dishonored that that fact is eligible to identify the account as a small claim, international units, and return to the source by the voluntary confession of the tax in the filing, thereby authorizes the supervisor to issue the tax refund in settlement and closing. From previous discussions, you were shown how the International Monetary Fund is created in the county and the 1099 OID reporting returns the tax to the source, the mutual fund, and that is the federal project under the superintendent thereof. The federal projects is to create exchange for the states that cannot issue their own specie. They do that through our own Social Security account at the Treasury. The superintendent of the federal project is to establish original issue of the IMF and regulate/govern the issue of funds, mutual funds, at the county of origin, and place the issues/funds with the banks to fund production of goods and services, and tax return, to the source for settlement, enclosing an exchange Treasury Direct, SSN, #, that's the federal project. Mutual fund in the county goes to production of goods and services, goes to, by bill/presentment, consumer/user, by acceptance, and returns to source, mutual fund in county. This is the root of the mutual fund from start to finish. That is the federal project, as the state cannot issue its own specie. That is why the fund is not exempt from federal tax. We must voluntarily report the delinquent tax, i.e. Federal Tax Form 1099 OID. If you follow the blocked credit to the purchase mutual fund and through the banks to the producers of product and back to the consumer/user, who reports the tax for return to the source, you will more easily understand the original issue. The source is our credit, probably orally given, and when reported on the 1099 OID, it is that written confession of the debt that is returned to the source by the operator of the electronic circuit for return to the source. Thus there was nothing there, source, in the first place, and nothing is returned. The account is tired face. There should be enough information out by now to enable those in need to consider requesting the filing of the 1099 OID, probably taking all invoices and receipts to H&R Block to prepare the taxes. Maybe wait until they H&R Block prepare the 1040 or whatever form they propose and give you the bill for the tax and preparation cost. Then, request they file that amount on the Federal Tax Form 1099 OID on that issue for return to the source, and settlement for closing in exchange Treasury Direct SSN #. That might be one way to do it. Just give them everything they need to bring your tax reporting current. And, when they give you the bill for tax, that is when you request they report that amount on 1099 OID, and ask for an advance on the tax refund. Even your Form 1040 has provisions for reporting 1099 right on the 1040. I hope this helps to reveal the mystery. More notes, February 11, 2006. It is the credit policy that is under the superintendent of a federal project. And it is for him to set the standards for issue of the mutual fund in the county to fund all commerce to produce product of goods and services, and to provide a way for the tax return to source and settlement and closing in exchange. In previous notes herewith, this was discussed from a different point of view depending on the question priming the answers. You might pay particular attention to the county attorney holding the mutual fund that provides credit for the operating engineers contracting for the municipal needs. It is the products from these projects that we use and get a bill for the use. This is the bill we report to the source because the account is prepaid by the county attorney using our credit to purchase the mutual fund and let that same credit out to contractors who bill us for product, and when reported back to the source it is acknowledged the account was prepaid. Thus, there is no other transfer required, only the admission of the tax on the issue, which is the bill. The county attorney is holding the prepaid account derived a derivative by using a blocked grant used to purchase the mutual fund that hold until a tax return to the source is filed. That's the federal project, IMF, in the federal grant applied for by the county attorney in his effort to provide public agency funding when no more local bond issues can be passed. The 1099 OID and the demand deposit. I'm almost sure that it is the Federal Tax Form 1099 OID filing on the issue that sets a demand on deposit into action. A certain amount of US dollars on deposit in US banks are identified as having a source, being an issue subject to tax. It is when Federal Tax Form 1099 OID is actually filed on the particular issue that a demand is made on the funds that are connected to the said original issue. This is when the tax identifies the same as a small claim or a small business, not of public corporations and agencies created from statutes at large. Thus, the 1099 OID filing identifies the private claim as a small claim and not the large public claim. Most property financed by this method will be sold at auction within 60 days to make the tax return to the source. Many less complicated assets are sold within 3 weeks. Note pro tunc. You should maybe condition your request for the tax ID information as needed to file the 1099 OID with the term NOC pro TUNC. This term may apply to many of your issues. For example, the request for the tax ID hashtag, don't say, taxpayer ID hashtag, is for the first appearance NOC pro TUNC. On other matters too. NOC pro tunc might apply when request is made that it should have been done at the time of appearance at arraignment hearing, etc. This request is made NOC pro tune for the date of arraignment and appearance thereon. End of notes. Notice, Jim Rivers, Obi-Wan Kenobi, America's Bulletin, and others mentioned are not affiliated with Freedom School.